Today on Torque King TV, I want to show you guys some shop supplies and tools that are relatively inexpensive, but a must-have for the do-it-yourselfer. Some of the items we have on the table here, we don't carry. Some of them we do, but we use all of them on a fairly regular basis. The first one is a Caliper Set. This is a digital one, and some of us here have a little bit hard time with numbers, like me, so this also has a fraction function, so instead of just showing the decimals of your measurements, it'll show the inch fraction. Another thing we use a lot is a thread pitch gauge. Sometimes you run into fasteners that are not typical sizes, and this helps you identify what it is. We have a standard and a metric set. Rubber gloves help you keep your hands clean. Use those all the time. A good penetrating oil. The one we like to use is made by Tacoma Screw, or branded by Tacoma Screw. It's called Bolt Breaker. I've used a lot of stuff. PB Blaster, Lawson and Tifco have their own brands. None of them seem to work quite as good as this. When you spray this on rusted on bolts and stuff, you can actually see it bubbling as it works its way in, and the other ones you just don't see that. It just kind of sits there. Not as cheap as a WD-40 or something like that, and it does not dissolve a styrofoam cup, but most bolts aren't made out of styrofoam, so that's usually not an issue. Brake clean. This is an extremely good parts cleaner, degreaser. We use the chlorinated stuff, which is not available in all 50 states, unfortunately. It's a little pricey compared to some things, but it works really good. It's non-flammable, so you don't have to worry about smoking your cigarettes around it. And the power of a cleaner is not necessarily measured by its flammability anymore. We've used that for years and years and years, and I've tried some other cleaners and they don't work as good. It will melt some cheaper plastics. I'm not sure what kind of plastics, but the little Chinese scrubber brushes you get, if they got a plastic handle on them, it'll melt those. So don't get it on plastics or rubber if you can help it. It's a very good degreaser. A rust remover. We use the WD-40 rust soak. It's pretty good. We just put some in a SpaghettiOs can and put a part in there and come back 20 minutes later, and it'll have dissolved most of the rust off of whatever parts we're working with. I also have put some in a tumbler, like a Thumbler's tumbler, with some stainless tumbling media in there for the little bit more crusted on stuff, and it works really good. It does run out of life. Once it starts to turn black, it's pretty much expired. Then it's full of carbon, and it'll still work, but your parts will turn black because the carbon will stick to it. Safety goggles. Don't forget to wear those. If you ever get some of this brake clean in your eye, you'll be getting a pair of these pretty quick. If you do much kind of fabricating stuff, if you use grinding wheels a lot, try a flap disc. It's basically little pieces of sandpaper that you put on an angle grinder. Works really good for busting down metal and shining it up. The cheaper ones, I don't know if you can see in this, but there's no flap. Between the flaps, there's no space. The good ones, they're more expensive, but they'll have some space between the flaps, and that acts like a cushion, and they work about 10 times as good as the cheaper ones. You do pay for that. If you use them a lot, you'll notice the difference though. Pick set. Got to have a pick set. Picking the spindle thrust washers out and lock washers and stuff like that, got to have a pick set. Cleaning the little stones out from around ball joints to press the old ones out and the new ones in, got to have a pick set to get those little stones out. A bearing packer. How this works is you can either pull this out and hand scoop grease in, or it's got a Zerk fitting in the center. You can use a grease gun and fill the bottom up with grease, and then you put your bearing in, put this down in, you push on it, rock it a little bit, and it'll squeeze grease up through the rollers on your bearing, so you don't have to do this number anymore. If that's how you've been packing bearings, you will be extremely impressed with one of these. Keeping in the line of greasing things, needle adapters. Sometimes you get some hard to reach grease fittings you can't get into. If you can get straight on a regular grease fitting like that one, you can use a needle adapter to get in there. If you can't get straight in there, you use a flush type grease fitting that's recessed, and you can get a pretty good angle on there and still get grease in. And this particular one does come with a couple of adapters for basically keeping it from wobbling around on your grease gun. It's got the smaller one, which fits the standard, what just about everybody has, these little $5 fittings which leak grease, and sometimes they get stuck on. They do kind of twist off, but you can't always get a pair of pliers in there to twist it off to relieve the pressure, and sometimes you end up breaking the Zerk fitting when you're pulling the hose off. Which brings me to this, a lock and lube grease adapter. It's got little jaws on there. It clamps on the grease fitting, and then it won't let go. So you got a free hand to use your grease gun or whatever, and even if you pack it full of grease and you can't squeeze any more in there, and where a regular fitting would get stuck on, you just pull the lever down and it comes right out. And this, there's two adapters with this particular needle fitting. The bigger one will fit the Easy Lube coupler. These Easy Lube couplers, they do come in a short and a long, and I'll drop half of them real quick. They do come in a short and a long, and this is, I think, just an implement bushing for a 3-point, but it does fit in there. The diameter on that, let's use our handy caliper. .66, which is about 2132, which pretty much 11/16 hole this will fit in. See, comes in handy. And on the places where you don't think you can get this, but you can get a regular cheap fitting that always either sticks on or leaks, always, and we'll show you a quick video of that here in a second. But you could probably do something like put a grease fitting on, so you got a Zerk fitting on the one end instead of that needle, so you could clamp it on and then use that if you can't quite get that big of a fitting in there. This is a grease fitting I filled earlier, a couple weeks ago. And when I first put the grease gun on it, it leaked, so I held it on there. And then when it was full, it doesn't bleed out of this particular fitting, but I filled it up till I couldn't pump anymore. And when it was full, I couldn't get the end off. I tried twisting it. I had to use pliers to get it. And luckily, I can get in here with pliers, but most things that I grease, I can't use pliers on it. But let's see what happens if it does the same thing as it did before. And I've got more fittings too. Okay, snapped on there. And the adjustable fitting is tightened all the way, and you can see it still leaks. So push it. Now it's taking a little more grease. Okay, it's starting to get tight. Okay, and I can't get it off. Some grease is still leaking out of there, and there's so much pressure that I can't turn that, the adjustability on it, to release it. So we'll get some pliers. See, grease is leaking out. I'm pulling on, there we go. Pulling on the hose and it finally came off. So, let's use this same Zerk and we'll test a lock-in lube adapter. Okay, I just swapped it out. Swap the other adapter out for the lock-in lube adapter. Wipe off all this wasted grease real quick here. Okay, let's try it and see what happens. If I get my hand in here, there we go. Okay. Oh wow, no grease is coming out. Let's pump this thing all the way up. And I have no idea how much pressure this hand grease gun puts out. A few thousand PSI anyway. Okay, that is pumped as tight as I can get it. No greases came out. Let's see how easy it is to take it off. Look at that. Speaks for itself. You see there's a little grease coming out of here. That's just because the pressure expanded the hose and filled it with grease. And when you relieve the pressure, the hose contracts and the grease has to go somewhere. But if I didn't pump it all the way up, I don't think I would have lost any grease. So these are, I think, worth their weight in gold. Then when you get done greasing, you can get a lot of dirt and stuff built up on the end of the Zerk fitting over time, and then when you go to re-grease, you've got to spend the time to clean it all off so you're not just pushing dirt down into whatever you're trying to put grease in. So some kind of a grease or a Zerk cap that goes over your grease fitting. I like to use these if I can get them in. They make them in all kinds of sizes. If you got really tight tolerances, like on a smaller U-joint or something, where the mass of a cap like that would not fit. They do make little vinyl caps. They're extremely low profile. Being vinyl, they do tend to get dried up and start cracking after a couple of years. So they're usually a throwaway item, and sometimes they're a little hard to get off, but they'll still keep dirt out of where you don't want dirt to be. Moving on to some other different types of shop supplies you should have. Some good electrical tape. There's all kinds of stuff you can get at the dollar store. I like to use the Super 33 Plus. It doesn't crack over the years. There's stuff I put this on 10 years ago. The tape still hasn't cracked. I recently bought a trailer that had, I had them put a new electrical plug on it, and they used some cheap tape. The tape they used was out in the weather for about a month, and one of the wires I found, they didn't wire right. I didn't have right blinker and stoplight. And so I had to peel the tape off so I could switch the wires around. And after just a month of being out in the weather, it was cracking already. So you save yourself a lot of headache getting some good tape. It'll last a lot longer. On that same electrical side, if you do much wiring, a method of soldering is going to make your job last a long time. I like to use a solder pot. It's a lot better than using a soldering iron. A soldering iron is, I don't even own one anymore. They're just ridiculous. This won't do like the female blade connectors, because they've got the little spring in there that when you put the blade in, it's got to move. It'll solder that shut, but everything else you can just crimp your end on, dip it in there, make sure you use a good flux, brush the excess solder off real quick, stick it in a little cup of water, and then you've got a fairly corrosion resistant terminal. If you want, you can put some shrink tube over it for a little added protection, or some good tape. A magnetic parts and tool tray. That's just about a must-have for most jobs. Keep everything in one place so you don't kick it all over the floor. High-speed steel drill bits. High-speed steel bits last a lot longer than a cobalt or a titanium coated bit. I was looking at a hardware store at the prices of them a while back. The titanium coated one was $3, the cobalt one was $5, and the high-speed steel was $8 or $9. It's worth the money. I've tried using some cheap ones, just I need a bit right now. I'm not at the shop or whatever, and so I get a cheap one. The titanium bits I get about 1 use out of. The cobalt ones, 3 to 5. High-speed steels, I usually break them before I wear them out. If you use them a whole lot, they will eventually wear out. And you can get a sharpener and sharpen them, but they're not real expensive. I usually just get a new one if they start to get dull. Shop towels, you gotta have these. Gotta have these. Sometimes a white towel just does not absorb what you need to get up. Adapters that go in a drill, and they've got a socket adapter on the other end. Should get you a set of these. They're handy. Lag bolts or something that have a hex head on them, and there's no reason to use a ratchet in a socket. Get you a set of these. They're like $5. You can get all three at a well-known, won't mention it, harbor store. About $5 versus about $2.50 for each one at a regular box store. I guess it doesn't matter what you pay for them. I use them all the time. Steel wool. Gotta have steel wool. If you're doing axle seals, you pull your axle shaft out and you notice there's a little rust or a little burr on there. You can use that steel wool, polish that rust right off and polish the burr down. If that doesn't get the burr, use a little emery cloth that's pretty much sandpaper on a strip. Some fine grit emery cloth, that'll help clean stuff like that up too. A bolt extractor set. I've got a couple. Use them more often than not, I guess. Taking all the used axles apart that we do, all the used axles and all kinds of components. You break a lot of bolt heads off. This'll get it out. And then if you do break it off, and this stuff didn't help, sometimes, or if you don't want to break it off, and that still didn't help, sometimes you can heat it with a propane torch or something, paraffin wax. It'll wick it right in, and that bolt will come right out. Something else that's really good. A slide hammer set, or at least the slide hammer itself. We use the slide hammer all the time taking spindles off of front axles. We've got an adapter that goes from the spindle threads to the slide hammer, and it beats the heck out of using a big soft blow hammer or a dead blow hammer. Also should have some kind of a magnet. Drop a lot of stuff and this beats bending down to pick something up, or if it's in there where you can't get it, which is where you usually drop it, something like this, or one on a flexible wire, they can be lifesavers. I think the last thing I got on my table here is a battery charger. Digital battery chargers do a little better at not overcharging. I've got one here. It's old, probably 40 years old, maybe a little older. Works real good, but with its age, now it charges at about 17.8 volts. I think I measured it last time I used it. And I was wondering why I was blowing up batteries. Thinking my batteries, motorcycle batteries and stuff, they had a few years on them, thinking, well, they're just old. Maybe that's why they cooked off. But then come to find out, I measured this and it was putting out over 17 volts. The good thing about those is that you can have an absolute dead battery, plug it in, and you can get it charged so you can move, your lawnmower or whatever, you can get it to start. Whereas a digital battery charger, if it doesn't sense any voltage, it won't give any. So it's got its ups and its downs. But I went with the fancy, this is an actually Optima brand battery charger. I got it because it's got the cord storage on it. There's cord store in there, handle folds down. It reads out how many volts and how many amps it's putting into the battery. So if it starts to go out, as long as that reading is accurate, I know when to replace it. I haven't fried a battery since I bought this. It was pretty expensive. You don't need to get one quite this expensive, but it is nice to know what kind of juice you're putting in. And the cord storage, that's a must-have too. And of course, like any kind of packaging, once you take it out, it's hard to get it back in. But yeah, there you go. Real clean. Compared to that, you wrap this around it and that's your storage. Whereas this, it got a place for the charging leads plus the 110 cable. This also does have a plug-in for a USB end, also the maintainer, the little maintainer things I have on batteries. I can't remember what connection you call that, but it came with both of those. One of my motorcycles actually has one of those plug-ins built in, so I can just plug this right in without having to actually get to the battery. So those are must-haves. Well, that'll do it for today's quick episode. Just wanted to give you guys a little idea of some other stuff that's out there if you haven't tried it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time right here on Torque King TV.